Hey, what's going on? Welcome back to the podcast. This is a Flux Diet podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. On this podcast, we talk about all things to increase muscle, hypertrophy, performance, and better body composition, all without destroying your health in the process. And today on the program, I've got my good buddy, Dr. Adam Sumarski. And we cover a wide range of topics from his background doing sports medicine and medical training, and also his military experience, having exposure to many different places around the world, why it is a benefit to be a well-rounded person, even within your own discipline. He recently went to the ACSM Sports Medicine Conference. So why it is a good idea to get out, go to different conferences, meet different people, what are the benefits of that, having skin in the game versus the Askholes, what to do with them, and then also the role of mentors, both people that you can serve kind of both roles, people that you consider a mentor and mentee, and that can go both directions, just depends upon the area and the person. And at the end, related to sports medicine, we talk about imaging versus kind of old school diagnostics. What are the pros and cons of one versus the other? This is somewhat of a pet peeve of mine. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but the current trend is get imaging at all costs. And I think that not only is there potentially a financial cost to that, there may be some psychological cost also, and you don't always need imaging. But that's, of course, not to say you never need imaging, right? Like most things, the answer depends on the context and what you're talking about. And Dr. Adam talks about some really new, cool ultrasound imaging and even point of care imaging and how that will probably change these sports medicine and I think other areas of medicine coming up. So if you have an injury or you potentially get injured, I think this is a really good conversation. And yeah, just really enjoyed it. And the podcast today is brought to you by the Flux Diet Mentorship. Most people probably don't know that I do have this. I generally only advertise it to people who have completed the Flux Diet certification. And what it is I break down 4 specific areas. Exercise assessment, primarily on an online environment. This is everything from aerobics capacity, movement, strength, breathing, etc. It's relatively easy to learn how to do these things in person. I think online it is definitely a lot trickier. But can be done. And then we move into marketing and what you should do for that, primarily using a content-based newsletter model. We also talk about mindset, both yourself and your clients. And then the last component is personal development. And this is everything from how do you get better to scheduling your time, what is a realistic way to work on your business. A lot of people I see do pretty good with their business the first year, but they've completely torched themselves in the process. So how do you hopefully avoid that? Right now, I probably won't do this again until next year, but if I get a whole bunch of people, I might consider doing it earlier. You'll have to email me for an application, and there probably was not a super easy way to find my email, but you can find it. You could hit me up via the website or Instagram or other ways. As you figured out, that's done on purpose. So only people who are interested will get the application. Then I review the application, I'll do an hour chat on the phone. And if I have enough people, we'll probably do one this year. If not, we'll probably do it again in January of next year. So if you're interested in that or you want more information or have any questions, find a way to email me, or depending on maybe you're listening to this later. So enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Dr. Adam Sumarski. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast here, Dr. Adam. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and give us a short background on yourself because you've had a wide variety of different things you've done, and you're just living in the state below me now, down in the cornfields of Iowa there.
That's right. Eastern Iowa. So cornfield,
Eastern Iowa.
also we have some ski mountains and Mississippi River. So a little bit of different
I think
topography than
mountains, you're
Iowa.
stretching it there, buddy.
Yeah, they're like it doesn't. Mountains are of various sizes. They don't all have to be the
We
Rocky
can have
Mountains.
120 vertical feet. That's a
That's right.
mountain.
That's right. As long as you can ski down them, they count as a mountain. That's right. So I'm originally from Erie, Pennsylvania. I had went to undergraduate in my hometown at Gannon University, and then did my medical school training at Michigan State University. All of my postgraduate training, for the most part, I done at Walter Reed at the old Army Medical Center before they had combined with the Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, and then did an additional postgraduate training. My background is in physical medicine rehabilitation, and so I did that at the University of Pittsburgh. I spent 15 years in the Navy before I transitioned to the civilian world in Iowa this past summer, and so had a variety of great opportunities. I had some time stationed with the construction battalions down in Mississippi, which also included a few deployments overseas to Afghanistan, Kuwait, Africa a couple of times, Southern Europe, and things of that nature. And so great life experiences. My last tour of duty was as the sports medicine department head at the United States Naval Academy. And so I was there for a little over 4 years, and a wonderful experience. And I think we'll maybe dig into that a little bit later, but great experience, great town, and was a great jumping platform for me to transition to the civilian world. And we recently moved a little bit closer to my wife's family out here in Iowa, Dubuque, Iowa, and having a great opportunity to be a part of a lot of great organizations here. Had the opportunity to be the head team physician for USHL hockey team, the Dubuque Fighting Saints, and local college, Loras College, and then also help out with a variety of the other high school colleges in town. And so I primarily practice spine and sports medicine, so a lot of musculoskeletal medicine, and a variety of things, everything from like sports related concussion to some spine procedures. And some of the fortes that I also dive into is musculoskeletal ultrasound procedures and like diagnostic wise. And so been a great opportunity and a brand new experience. And as you mentioned before, it also comes with a few less rules. I get to dress myself in the morning and choose whether or not to like shave my face, which after 15 years of daily shaving appears to lead most of us to not do that for a period of time afterward.
Nice. And tell us a little bit more about the military. When you're in the career, what were you doing primarily overseas? You had mentioned you were into several different countries deployed.
Yeah, all my time in the military was as a physician. I joined as I was graduating undergraduate and through what's called a health professional scholarship program. And so there's a variety of different ways to join as you're starting your medical career. I think the two most common ones are through the HPSP program, where you get the military helps fund some of your medical education, which at times is slightly expensive, and so it kind of helps take some of that burden off. And but at the same time, I used to joke that well, now I can say it, but at the time I was like, please don't tell anybody, because I'd probably join the military without the funding too, because there's I come from kind of a military family background, and had always kind of like been kind of like, straddling the line of when I was going to join. And it just worked out for me that time in my life, and that opportunity seemed to fit best. And so that opportunity allows you to go to essentially a civilian medical, like any medical school in the country, and provides a portion or all of your tuition depending on the cost of the institution, and then also gives you some stipend to pay for some of your supplies. As while tuition is very high, it's also only a portion of the cost of medical school too. There's one or two hidden fees that are in the small print when you sign up, and so I think it allows you to do that, but then also gives you a few opportunities during medical school as well to kind of get ingrained as you go through officer school, and get about if I remember correctly, about 4 weeks of active duty training in some type of military like medical experience, or just like in a hospital, like a normal rotation. And so those were great experiences to kind of work into the active duty lifestyle when you graduate. The other opportunity is through the Uniformed Services University, which is a first-rate medical school in Bethesda, Maryland, right on the same campus of what I alluded to earlier, Walter Reed and the National Naval Medical Center kind of formed together. And so I had a lot of great experiences while at the Naval Academy, being able to be a part of teaching the medical students and residents and fellows and stuff at that institution as well, and got to be a part of there as a teaching professor and stuff. And so it's been great to be a part of that, growing through the program too. But after I graduated medical school and finished my training, some of my experiences overseas were just as like a general medical officer, essentially providing physician care in a variety of different ways. I mean, everything from helping out with surgeries in a combat operating room to taking care of coughs and colds and preventive medical care. For example, when we went to Africa to prevent things like malaria and that type of like preventive force protection type of stuff. And so a lot of great experience there, more than just being a physician in a clinic. There are a variety of medical things that are not typical for a physician, planning to make sure that people don't get malaria when you go to another country, and what medicines you're going to take in a preventive fashion and how you're going to take those, and looking at the countries you're going to and other threats there from a medical standpoint as well. And then how you'll be able to take care of somebody in case something bad happens. It is an interesting evolution that is not covered in typical medical school. And then all the opportunities that go along with that aren't medical related. I had fortunate opportunities to do things like learn how to drive and operate a variety of vehicles, and participate in other military officer type of things, which again are not like normal for a normal physician as you go through training and then you go straight into practice. And so it was great to be a part of a larger, broader organization that taught more than just how to be a good physician. I think that I was fortunate enough throughout the years to get some additional like life experience from a leadership standpoint. You get to be part of a department, and oftentimes if you do well, the head of your own department or parts of the organization or battalion. And so managing a large group of people in a wide variety of lives and on deployment, oftentimes 16 or 17 different countries spanned out over multiple continents is a lot when you're like a young physician or a young officer. And so those were great experiences, and I had, from a leadership standpoint, not only those like real world opportunities, but as I went through the ranks and got promoted up through commander in that time period, had some opportunities to have more formal education as well through leadership, through Cornell and through the Naval Academy. And so I think all those things not only makes it may or may not make you a better physician directly, right? Like learning about leadership and spending times in another country and helping do military specific things that aren't medical related obviously don't make you an expert in a certain medical topic, but it certainly makes you a better leader and makes you a better person, which I think that way indirectly makes you a better physician and a teammate and a leader going forward when throughout your military career, and then afterwards in the civilian world too, when you join a hospital or a practice, and you have more than just experience of taking care of patients. You have experience of building a team and all the things that go into that. So,
oh, that's great. Being deployed and as a physician in those different countries, what was some of the craziest things that you've seen? Because I would imagine you've seen a wide variety of, we'll say, different issues that have shown up.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's not for everybody, and I think that if I guess what I mean by that is if your goals as a physician are to do orthopedic surgery, just foot and ankle, and you only want to do right first toes or something like that, you're going to have to do a little bit more, right? You have to take care of a variety of people from 50 to 17 years old, and that are oftentimes in a stressful environment. Not all of those deployments were in a combat zone like Afghanistan. I mean, but there are like other threats, and it is stressful. And even some of those locations, there are kind of more of a home base per se, where they're in a little bit of a safer environment. We had folks in, Rota, Spain, which is of course a little bit different than maybe being in Kandahar, Afghanistan. And so those scenarios are a little bit different, but people are still away from their families, right? And oftentimes for the first time. And there's a lot of stress that goes along with that. And while, a variety of things occur to ensure that the you don't get deployed with health conditions that may, affect the mission. Things come up, and when you're stressed, when your body is stressed, things come up that are not common, right? I mean, I recall the first couple of, maybe the first like few months of deployments, and I mean, I saw a handful of different people that were diagnosed with shingles under the age of like 20 years old. And when you go to
Wow.
medical school, people assume that that's something that's just for like elderly individuals or somebody who's like not healthy, and the stress of things like combat or being away from home kind of lead to some of these diagnoses that you wouldn't as commonly seen. And during those deployments, I've seen everything from like unfortunate cases of cancer diagnoses to mental health things, from just being everything from being sad away from home or family, or things that maybe you don't always talk about, right? I mean, I don't know how many, but it seemed like a lot of people miss the birth of their son or daughter and things like that, or missing key events like people's weddings or funerals. And there's no time out in some of those deployments where you go, hey, I got really stressful stuff at home, I just got to go back and take care of this and come back. Those things don't happen. And when those things aren't as smooth back home, especially in in combat at this time, in this time where not many times was I away from the, like, for long periods of time without some version of internet access, right? It probably wasn't two gigabytes or whatever. I don't even know the correct term, but like, it wasn't lightning fast internet. And sometimes you couldn't do much other than send an email or like barely make a phone call, but you still had access to people to like find out about things. And so you weren't as isolated, if something bad was happening at home, you weren't naive to it. And so those things, of course, it's hard to focus on playing a basketball game if you're a basketball player, and it's hard to be a soldier, sailor, Marine if you have other things distracting you in your personal life. And so taking care of people in that stressful environment, from being feeling like they're going to harm themselves to just like having a bad day, not and then from musculoskeletal injuries and dermatology and all these things. And so it's not just about like, I want to be an orthopedic surgeon, I only want to take care of like feet and ankles. It's a little bit more than that. And that like breadth of stuff is not typical, right? Typically you kind of find your area. And even if you go into primary care medicine, you kind of find your own niche within that. And you're not really like expected to know all that stuff. But when you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're the only physician for, as far as you can see or talk to somebody, saying like, hey, you just got to wait next week to see the specialist. Next week is 12 months away, and they're not coming anytime soon. And there are like, it's a little bit of a stretch. I mean, it depends on where you're stationed at. The advances in medical care and like telecommunication is huge, right? I mean, we weren't at that time having Zoom things like this, and I'm not sure if that's changed on the combat field, but there were things like this where you could at least like reach out to somebody, right? Or through your own like mentors or connections. If you don't know something dermatology wise, you could take a picture and send it to somebody. And occasionally maybe a specialist would like fly through and stop by for a day every like few months or something, and if it like hit right, maybe that would be helpful for you. And so it's not like you were like out on an island by yourself with no connection, but oftentimes, you had to be responsible for things that if you were here, right, in Minnesota or Iowa, and I saw something that I was like, hey, I mostly know what this is, but I'm not 100% sure. You should see my colleague who does just this. When there is no colleague that does just this in the middle of nowhere, I mean, you end up taking on some ownership of stuff that maybe you wouldn't typically do. And not always the same resources, right? I mean, you can't just like hit Amazon and have something show up the next day that I didn't have Amazon Prime in Afghanistan or Africa or Europe. And so those things are challenging, and sometimes you have to like you have to kind of go ad hoc and ad lib and figure out what the best you can do for somebody, and make some other, like I was alluding to before, like some leadership decisions of whether someone comes or goes, right? And I think that since I'm from like a sports background, I think that I allude a lot of that to, if you only have one quarterback and there's no backup, and you're not 100% sure if his elbow is good or not, if you send him away, he doesn't come back, and it's going to be hard completing a mission without the only quarterback in the battalion, right? And so, or the only lineman that you have left, or the only wide receiver. And so, when you have to make some of those decisions, you better be sure on some of those things. And like I said, sometimes you may not be the expert in making those decisions. And so, some of those stresses that go along with it, if you medevac someone back to the United States, they may come back in a few months, or they may just be stuck there now. And so, and there may not be a replacement in that period of time. And then sometimes people do need to go, and it's not popular, right? If there is down to only one wide receiver and they really do need to go back home, you might not be making a lot of friends as you make those arrangements. And so again, I think those are different decisions and different opportunities that you get exposed to that you don't often in medicine, just working in a large hospital or a normal clinic setting.
Yeah. And speaking of a wider background, I originally met you at the ACSM conference on the East Coast through our good friend, Dr. Sarah Campbell, which was great. She's been on the podcast here before. So we got to hang out, and we even got to drink beer while we did some quiz rating of was it Knowledge Bowl, or what was the quiz thing they had going on?
Yeah, I think it was just the Quiz Bowl. And
Quiz Bowl.
they were, of course, like non-alcoholic beers, because we were very focused on if there was an objection on a question that we gave the right answer. So
you're 100% sober.
100% sober.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And then you got to see Dr. Sarah again recently at the ACSM, the national conference, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm a big proponent of ACSM from like a mentorship standpoint. Some of my best mentors over the years have been heavily involved within ACSM. Some of my introduction into sports medicine was through attending the ACSM national conference. And I think that, I know it's different for like all aspects of medical community or academics or sports or just like healthcare in general. But from a physician standpoint, most of our conferences are kind of physician only. And sports medicine itself is not just physicians taking care of people. It's a wide variety of folks. So, physicians, athletic trainers, PTs, exercise physiology, nutrition, et cetera, et cetera. And so like being able to have a conference where all of those people who in clinical practice actually do have to come together as a team and provide like multidisciplinary care, to have all those people in one place and to be able to get insight from all of those experts from a wide variety of angles is very unique, I feel like, in medicine, but also like very like appropriate for the subject matter of sports medicine. And so definitely my favorite conference, definitely my favorite group to be around. It's hard not to like attend that conference and be energized and be excited about why you're there. And even if you feel like you know everything, which I definitely is not in that category, you learn so much and are able to bring stuff back to your own practice and help take care of your patients. And so great experience. It's great to be back in person too, as much as it's great to have this resource. It's different in person. I don't know how you feel about that, but I we had some of these conferences online, and I don't know, you get a little bit, you still learn some stuff, but the ability to just have an informal conversation like this that pops up when you're sitting next to somebody in a lecture or in a committee meeting is just, the feeling's different, the pulse of the place is different, and it just energizes you a different way.
Yeah, I think it's the double-edged sword of, it's easier to do video conferencing and stuff now. We can have this conversation. I did, after COVID started, was it 1 3-day talk through ASN, American Society of Nutrition, which is sort of like the more research aspects in terms of nutrition. And the lineup was like amazing, like all the top people, like people I wanted to see. And I realized, I'm like, oh crap, I have to take 3 days out of my schedule when I'm at home, which is a little bit trickier than when you go somewhere, you kind of know ahead of time and can plan around it. I literally made it 3/4 of the first day, and I couldn't take it anymore. I'm like, I know they're online, I'll watch them later. Because like sitting in just one place, staring at your computer, and they did a good job of having, the talks come up one after another and stuff. And the talks were great, but it was just so weird because like for, my whole life, I'm used to going to a conference and the experience of running into random people and having conversations with them. And then, they know this person who knows that person. And, you should go see this topic. And so you tend to see more things that you wouldn't normally see otherwise. Where I found when it was online, like I probably gravitated towards the stuff I really didn't need any more knowledge in. really, just because it was familiar. Or I think when you go to an in-person event, it's like, oh, I heard this topic's really cool. Oh yeah, let's go to that. And the people you meet and just hanging out afterwards, it's just completely different.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't mean to entirely disparage it. I mean, you're right. I think one of the best things that came out of it is now, we've set up similar to when you and I were at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Conference for ACSM. There's people that get to now be a part of something, and students and the rest of us that want to learn get to expose to people that otherwise you wouldn't be able to, right?
Yes.
You can't get somebody from four corners of the country always to take 3 days out of their job to give one talk, but somebody can, more likely to be able to take an hour out of their day to give a lecture. And if they do that at their desk in their office, then you can bounce right back into the clinic and see another patient and, or get back in your research or teach another class. And so the amount of people who have been exposed to some like, first class, like teachers and stuff like that, and experts, subject matter experts in their field, would never have happened at other places, right? Somebody who, only goes to the big conferences or is so busy, getting them to speak to somebody for 30 minutes online at a location, like let's say here in Iowa, those things never wouldn't have happened. Those things don't always happen. And so now you're right. When you look at some of those like lists, you're like, man, this is like the all-star list, right? And, those wouldn't always occur, but yeah, there's still something about the pulse of being there and feeling it. And you're right. The amount of times just at this last ACM conference where I was like, here's what I had like chosen for myself for the schedule. And then you're with somebody and they go, hey, I'm going down here. And you're like, well, what's that? You know what I mean? Like, I didn't put that on my radar. And then they tell you that, Mike's an awesome speaker and he's talking about these things. And you're like, man, I wouldn't have got that from the thing. And like, or you did, like you even listening to it and you're like, I don't know. Like even with you trying to sell it, I'm not sure. And you go over there because you trust the group's word and you're like knocked out of your socks. And so you're right. Those are amazing things. And again, I think that's like great about ACSM too, is that you get to go to that lecture and get to hear it. If you listen to a lecture on UCL injuries in your elbow, it's not just like from the doctor's standpoint, it's from everyone, right? It's that's what the nutritionist thinks you should do afterwards, the strength and conditioning coach, the exercise physiologist, and then, you get some clinical physician stuff too. And that's great. And it's awesome to be a part of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. What were some of your big takeaways from the conference this year? I unfortunately wasn't there. I wanted to go, but I ended up I'll be going to the International Society of Sports Nutrition instead. So I'll be there next week. So I kind of had the timing of ACSM was also like really bad this year for me personally. So, but I would love to hear about what some of your big takeaways were from it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the biggest takeaway is that I missed out on you being a part of it. So that was like
a negative. That's very nice. Your check's in the mail.
It was great. I mean, I think that, there's a lot of different talks that I went to and enjoyed, but again, my takeaways are that ability to like sit down and like have conversations with people that happen kind of organically as you went through there. There's more than one occasion where topics came up, and then you're sitting having a discussion at a committee meeting and you go, why don't we call Mike and have him come by? And you go, well, that's like exactly who we need to talk to, right? And before you know it, you have 5 or 6 people who are very passionate about a topic that are now going to collaborate for either clinical care or like a potential research project, and people that were otherwise like, struggling to do that on their own because of resources or contacts. And you've now been able to make connections for them. And things of that nature. I think the mentorship that goes on there is huge too. I mean, there's numerous times, I left there with, 2 new opportunities for someone to help me from a mentorship standpoint, and a handful of different, students, residents, and fellows that I now have meetings set up for since I came back to help guide them on their path as well and kind of give back in that direction. And I think that those things don't happen otherwise. I mean, in the wide variety, they're not just like all medical student people. I came back with somebody who's interested in exercise physiology. And I think that stuff's great. And they just want some physician like input on some stuff. And I don't think you get exposed to those things. I think that, I was fortunate enough myself to get selected as a fellowship a fellow of ACSM this year. And
congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. And it's, that's been like a huge professional goal of mine. And so I think that that's been kind of like a dream realized, and humbling to be a part of that group. As you mentioned earlier, Sarah Campbell is a great resource and mentor to help me through that, and Dr. Brian Davis as well. And so those things are great. And now again, it's great professionally, but it's also great professionally for me to be able to help out people like they helped me get through the process and have those experiences. And so those are always the things, there's always like something clinical I take away or some knowledge thing, but I think they pale in comparison to the camaraderie, the teamwork, and the experience from like a mentorship or mentee standpoint during that meeting. I think it's like very unique opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's one of the benefits of in-person versus online, right? I think online, like you said, is great. You can get some amazing talks from people you'd probably never see otherwise. So if you want just pure information that's kind of, I don't want to say scattered, but more random topics, I think it's great. But for all the other aspects and learning, stuff about stuff you didn't even know about in person, and just meeting people and getting guidance and everything is super beneficial. So I usually encourage newer students and even people in the fitness field, if you're not sure, just like save your pennies and go to like an in-person meeting. I think all the times I've been able to do that, I went to the first ISSN meeting I went to was in, God, was it 2006 now? 2000, somewhere in there. I might have the date wrong. No, it was 2011 actually. And it was the second time I had been there. And Jose Antonio called me. He's like, "Hey, do you want to give a talk on metabolic flexibility?" And I said, "Well, let me think about it." And I looked at my finances because I started going back to school full time. And I'm just like, "Oh, crap, I can't afford this. What am I doing?" So I called him back and I was like, "Oh, man, I don't think I can make it." And he's like, "Okay." And then I looked at the preliminary lineup and I saw Lou Schuler was presenting. I was like, "Oh," like one of my goals was to have like Lou Schuler edit an article of mine and have it be in Men's Health magazine. So I called Joey up and I'm like, "Hey man, like, I'll figure it out. I'll be there." He's like, "Okay." Because in my head, I'm like, well, if I'm speaking here and Lou's speaking here, then we must be at like the same level, right? Because at least you feel like you're, the person speaking there or whatever. So long story short, went there, met Lou, got him to go to my talk. We sat around afterwards and just talked for quite a while, and he proposed the article to Men's Health, and it ended up being like one of their, main cover articles, like for March of that year, or the year after. So, but I don't think that would have happened if I just sent him an email and said, "Hey buddy, you need to publish my article." Be like, "What? Who the hell is this?"
Yeah, that probably gets filed away in a different folder in his email.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I've gone to other, events in person and nothing's happened out of it. But I look back a lot of times of just the people you meet and then the connections you get from that, and different advice and leadership and mentorship and different people you've been able to help. So I do think there's a lot of perks of going in person.
Do you have, what are your thoughts going forward? Do you think that do you think we'll get back to more in-person stuff? I know we're going to get back to more, but do you think that like going forward, it's going to always be a little bit of a hybrid where not everybody's going back to in-person? And I know there's still a lot of barriers for ACSN this year as far as like different countries, COVID, medical,
right,
and travel, but there's a little bit less people because of that. Probably there's still plenty of, there's still a lot of people there, but I think some other conferences too are still like in that hybrid. And I think as much as maybe you and I enjoy going in person, I'm sure there's a group of people that are listening to us saying like, "Can't wait to not have to be around all these people ever again." And I would love to sit on my couch or in my bed and listen to 5 hours of lectures and hit pause when I want and get up when I want. And it's my dream to not have to interact with Mike and Adam ever again in person. So,
I'm sure there's a lot of people that probably say that. I don't know. I go back and forth. Like, I think initially there's going to be a sub niche for smaller, highly personal in-person things. I think bigger conferences like ACSM, ISSN, ASN, etc., experimental biology, I think they'll probably end up being more of a hybrid type thing. So I think they'll have a live in person, but they'll have a lot of it filmed for people to watch and to stream. I guess my fear is that because it's so easy to get information now, I think selling information is becoming harder and harder because so much is free, which again is, I sound like an old crotchety person who runs a business, but it's great because there's so much free information. The downside is I don't know if people appreciate it as much when it's free, and it tends to be very segmented and highly specific, but you don't have the overarching system per se for people to necessarily directly apply it. I say this as someone who sells like certifications online and everything else. I think there will be a sub market for smaller in-person events where, and I've talked to a couple people about this, where we were thinking of doing it in the US, maybe a couple spots in Europe where it's limited to like 12 people and it's a little bit more expensive, but it's 2 days. You have the people who authored a lot of the material there. You get a practical section. You get to hang out at dinner. We've even thrown up the idea of like everybody stays in the same house for 3 days, or, you know, it would be more expensive, but you would get like the time and the ability to answer all your questions to, you know, whoever the expert is in that area. So I think that might be one way going forward. But yeah, I don't know, because I also know that it's, if you're a big organization or even a moderate sized organization, like trying to get butts into seats, at least in the fitness realm, like I've had a couple potential opportunities to do some stuff in that area, and I'm like, I am not running it because I know how hard it is to get people to pay money and to get butts in the seats, and that's just not my skill set. You know, like if you want me to show up, yeah, now after having like 2.5 years of being able to hang out at home and not travel as much, it's going to be harder to get me to go to things per se, even to speak. But I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I was hoping you're gonna like answer all the questions here. Yeah, I think that you're right. I think in-person things, in order to attract people to come, are either gonna have to be more more of a personal experience, like you said, like more of an
Yeah.
intimate experience, I guess, and or gonna have to be more practical, hands-on stuff where you can sell like, hey, you can watch all the videos you want, but you can't make up for let's say ultrasound, like it can't make up for like physically having your hands on the ultrasound machine with a patient, like a fake patient, a model, a patient in front of you,
Yeah.
and being able to scan that patient and having somebody stand over top of you, adjust your hand and show you the correct way to do something. And so I think they're going to have to look a little bit more like that. But unfortunately or unfortunately, it's also going to come with a cost, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if there's, I think that's at times where different conferences you go to based on, I mean, it's not a coincidence, when multiple thousands of people show up versus 100, the cost looks vastly different. And so I think that those things are going to be expensive. And I think that unfortunately that then limits a lot of people, right? I think that being able to go to something like ACSM as a medical student because the cost is a little bit less and there's maybe some breaks for you as a student or an undergrad student, versus if it goes to more intimate or hands-on stuff and the cost goes up, there's not probably going to be the same break, right? There's not going to be like, oh, it's okay, Mike, we went back to school full time. We'll give you like, even if they give you 20% off, 20% of multiple thousands of dollars ain't going to
Yeah.
cut it, right? And so it's tough. I think that that might limit some opportunities, experiences, and time for growth. And then I think it takes away from, these are sometimes selfish platforms in the sense that I feel strongly about mentorship. It's like one of those big soapboxes I stand on, and whether people are listening to or not, I think that that takes it away from it. I think that if the only time that you're gonna like meet, that like that experience you were talking about, the only way you're gonna meet that person is in person, but the only places that person is now going to go to in person is if there's something that's attractive to them hands on. It's probably not going to allow me access as a young student to like be able to like rub elbows or see that person in person, or have that same experience. And so I think it hurts a big point from, it'll start segregating people into their own categories, which doesn't allow for that mentorship or collaboration, et cetera. And I think that'll be a big downfall for the field as well.
Yeah, it's something I kind of go back and forth on myself, because for me, if it's a smaller event and yeah, I can make some money on it, it's in a cool place, maybe I can kiteboard somewhere or whatever, that's fine. I'm not really expecting to make a ton of money on it, but it would have to be something that would still be cash positive in order for me to justify the time away and from other projects, which by definition, if everyone else is doing that, again, the price, even if everyone says we're going to make very little, it gets expensive really fast, especially when you're talking about different countries and,
Right.
trying to organize it. So I guess in my head right now, I've kind of split where if I have the opportunity to do a few of those things, if it's something cool, yeah, I'll probably do it, and then still go to some of the bigger conferences. And if people want to go to those conferences, they're usually not as expensive. You can hang out with people there in person. I mean, even just for my own business, like the podcast is free, the newsletter is free. There's some stuff that's just always going to be free. So if they want access to information, they'll still have it, but you also have to run a business. So you have to find where those kind of cutoffs, are. And the reality is money is just a way of having some skin in the game to have people pay attention to.
That's right. Yeah.
So I've made the mistake in the past where I've tried to help people for free who said they wanted help, but the follow through wasn't really there. And now I'm just like, here's your info, man. Like, do the best you can. If you're not going to do it, I have no skin in the game. You have no skin in the game. It's fine. I'm not going to worry about it. If you want me to follow up with you and you want highly personalized things, then yeah, you're going to have to pay to be like an online client or something like that too. So yeah, but I do kind of go back and forth because I do think, especially for students, the people that are bought in already are already doing some of the work. So I think they should still have access to other people.
Yep. That's a fascinating, probably out from this talk, but that's a fascinating human nature thing, isn't it? When we were in Annapolis, we had a friend that was trying to get rid of an old boat and essentially like just wanted to like give it to somebody and like put it on these like different variety of forums. And I was like, essentially free boat, come pick up the boat. I don't want to like ship, like it's in the water. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. We're moving to a new duty station. Somebody gave it to me. I mean, essentially like It's not worth, I'm not trying to make money off this thing. I want somebody to have the same opportunity if they're moving here, and couldn't get anybody to take this boat. There's nothing wrong with the boat. And then went back and put it as $5,000. Anybody want the boat? Gone the same day. Like it changed. Nothing's different with it. And he's like, man, and I even tried like giving the guy his money back. And then the guy was like, what's wrong with the boat? Do you want to give me my money back? It's like, geez, just fine. I'll take the money. Just take the boat, man. And so it's interesting that I think that we as people get like skeptical. If it's free, there must be something wrong with it, or it must not be worthwhile. Or like you said in this scenario, maybe it just doesn't grab you don't have that skin in the game. So you're not as locked in and you go, well, if I don't pay attention or I'm not really helpful or I'm not a good, mentee, it is what it is. But even if it's $5 or a nickel, somehow it like is enough to like engage you to be like, well, I don't want to lose that nickel. And now you're like a little bit more like involved and have some skin in the game. I think that's fascinating. You would think that if you were interested in reaching out to somebody and asking for help, you'd be honored that they'd be helping you. And then and if you don't have to pay for it, it really shouldn't affect your engagement, but it does, right? It does for a variety of different formats.
Yeah, I remember the first time I did that was kind of with a business coach I'd hired who had paid a lot of money that I kind of had the money at the time, but it still made me piss myself before I went to bed every night. And he's like, well, I just doing e-classes at the time. He's like, well, when you do the next e-class, when you have, maybe 48 hours, whoever signs up within the first 48 hours, you'll do, say, a free hour call with them. I'm like, what are you, insane? Like, I don't like if 20 people sign up, I don't have 20 hours even over the next month to even fulfill this. Like, you're crazy. There's no way. He's like, you realize not everyone is going to fulfill and do the call with you. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, they paid money to the program. Of course they're going to do the call. And he's like, you would do the call because that's who you are. Most people, however, will not. I'm like, I don't know. So I still tested it, and yeah, he was right. It was only 20%. And he's like, whoa, 20%. He's like, that's crazy high. I'm like, that's like ridiculously low.
So you had 20% of the people you offered free help to actually took it.
And these are people who bought the program.
Yeah.
These are people who actually bought. Right. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
It's fascinating, right? So I've even done this to my newsletter. Like, if people have questions and they're on my newsletter, which is 100% free, like if they write to me, I will try as best I can to answer their question. Again, sometimes people write 8 paragraphs and I can't even figure out what they're asking. So it's not always possible. But if it's a relatively straightforward question, I'll do whatever I can to answer them, because I figure they're opted into, what I have to say. It's an email. But it's amazing how many people like never ask anything. It's weird.
That is weird.
I'll see how many emails I get now, but I bet it won't be that many. Yeah, so that whole aspect of those like human psychology to me is just fascinating.
When you went through that process, I don't like building on that when you were learning about that like concept, did they talk about also that I think similar, but you can correct me if this is way off from what you were referencing too, but kind of what you get in return for an occasional like free something. I think sometimes what I run into in medicine is everybody's very busy, right? Everyone works long hours, has a lot of stuff. There's obviously in culture a work-life balance problem, and people feel burnt out and things of that nature. And so people, volunteering their time without a direct correlation of what maybe let's say they get out of it. I think that people sometimes have a hard time seeing the forest between the trees there. And I think that there's some caveats to that, right? Sometimes we as people volunteer time because you just enjoy doing it, and you do your job anyways for free. And so going places and helping out, like that's what you would have done anyways. So just being on like some board or committee to do it is irrelevant. You're going to go to the hockey game or like help out at the soup kitchen either way, because you just like being a part of the community. But I think what I'm asking is that like there are some things where it's like, hey, if you come volunteer at the university to do something in the lab, we're not going to pay you, but then maybe because you showed up and made those connections, you end up with 10 more clients or 10 more mentees, and or you tell 10 people about what you do, and then they just tell 10 of their friends, and before you know it, you got 15 new people listening to the podcast. I think that sometimes I try to explain that. I think from a sports perspective, we talk about, I spend a lot of time volunteering, like helping out in a training room or covering a football or wrestling competition. And then people are like, well, how much do you get paid to do that? And I go, nothing. And they go, that doesn't make any sense. And you're like, well, I mean, for one, I probably go watch anyways. And two, I feel like I'm helping out, and that's how I feel benefit, that's why I'm in medicine. And then, but then you do see some patients down the stream that go like, hey, I heard you're the team physician for the following school, and I want to be or my son sees you when he plays on the team. And so, there's that like indirect kind of thing, but to me, it sounds like it's 1 + 1 = 2. Like it makes like complete sense to me, and it's a win-win-win or whatever Michael Scott said. And so like, I think that, about, I don't feel like everybody knows that, you know what I mean? And what are your thoughts on that, I guess, or as you've gone, you have more experience with a lot of stuff than I do.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I kind of even struggle with, even like with social media. It's like I try to answer questions if people have them through social media, but at the same point, there's some days where my inbox on Facebook is just a trash bin fire, and there's no way I can get to it because I have obligations that are paying me, so they obviously get my time first. If I can get to some of the other stuff, yeah, I can, but obviously there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to fall through the cracks. I think for me, what I've realized is if the person I know is going to follow through, I'll do whatever for those people, because to me, it's if they don't follow through, what I realize it's my own neuroses. If they ask another question and I refer them back to the first question and it said, well, how did that go? And they're like, well, I didn't do that. I'm like, maybe you should go back and do that first, because that's still the same thing I'm going to tell you. It's like, if I want better body comp for nutrition, what do I do? Okay. Eat, 4 meals of 40 grams of protein a day. Okay, great. Bob goes away, comes back 3 weeks later. I heard intermittent fasting is like the thing to do for fat loss for nutrition. It's like, what I said protein was number one for you. How's that protein going? Well, I didn't do the protein. I want to know about fasting. That just drives me insane, and that's just my own neuroses, right? And I understand why they're asking, because they want the knowledge, etc. So I always kind of temper that. And then even some like podcast requests. So early on, you kind of go through this phase where I think you just say yes to everything. It's like, you want to do a podcast? Yes. You want to speak here? Yes. You want to do an article? Yes. Like whatever you can, kind of get to whatever level you end up at. But then at some point you can't do all those things because you realize like, oh shit, I can't even pay my bills. And then you get frustrated with people that don't do the follow through because they have no skin in the game. So then you kind of reach the point where you have to be much more discerning about, what you do, because you've only got a limited amount of time. And so that's kind of the kind of ongoing decision. So even like with some early podcasts I did, there was a couple of them where one guy, he lived next to a train, like he was like a block away, and we would be literally in the middle of recording this podcast. It was so loud you couldn't hear anything. And I'm thinking, you told me you're on episode 15 of your podcast. how does anyone even listen to any of this, right? Or I got wise and said, oh, is your podcast out now? Oh, no, man, it'll be out very soon, which those never saw the light of day, right? So now I'm kind of like, okay, if it's a brand new podcast, I could tell the guy this yesterday. I said, okay, on your 12th episode, you do 12 episodes, you show me you've done 12 episodes, I will be a guest on your podcast, right? So now it's like the barrier is like, you put in the work, you show me you're serious, cool, I'll help you all day, right? But if you're not so serious, but it, I don't know. At the same time, it's hard, right? Because like a lot of stuff I've volunteered for in the past has been super beneficial, right? I've done I don't know how many tons of talks where I didn't get paid anything to show up, or very little, right? But it was great. It was something I wanted to do, and it was a wonderful experience. So you can't really say, no, I'm never doing that stuff. So I kind of draw the line for business stuff and said, okay, the podcast is free, newsletter is free, you can get information, YouTube's free. If you want to escalate above that, then you're going to have to pay at some point. And then other opportunities that come by. The interesting part is, I think as you get later in your career, you can actually do the inverse again, right? So if I have a source where I have enough income that it's not directly tied to my time, right? So I have more leverage, then paradoxically, I can do all the volunteer stuff again that I want. And so oddly enough, that's kind of why I opted out of academics hardcore, because I realized, oh, wait a minute, I have a degree, I know people in the field. Oh, so I can just help them write papers and I don't need to make any money off it. I don't have to any affiliation. Nobody gives a crap if I'm even listed as first author, second author, 10th author. Nobody cares. So then I get to decide, oh, well, I want to work on the papers that I want to work on.
Yep.
So I don't know. That's kind of why I try to delineate it in my head.
What I'm hearing though is there are unseen, unheard of tapes out there that no one's heard yet. They're gonna come out like at some point. You're gonna like retire, or they're gonna have a hard time getting it. Like, I got a Mike Nelson thing, and you'll be like Tupac. There'll be like a song coming out later, 50 years after you're gone, and like, oh, we got new material here, never before seen, heard.
Or
if they have somewhere. That's excellent.
Video copies of like the first few talks I did. They were such a disaster. They were so horrible.
Yeah, I think also I was going to say that like volunteering is a fascinating, windy road. I agree. Like some of it has to be balanced. I think that is why a lot of people sometimes get a little burnt out too, right? Because when you're expending a lot of your time and passion, and maybe the people on the other end aren't as invested or aren't, taking it for worth, I think you get a little frustrated, right? And you feel like you're doing all these things to help other people, and then as a result, sacrificing maybe family time or friends or your own hobbies or interests or your health. And I think that can lead to a lot of like frustration and burnout. And then at the same time, on the other end there, looking back on some of my like greatest opportunities or most like memorable moments, if you trace them back, oftentimes stem from volunteering for something that nobody else was going to sign up for.
Yeah.
Or when you volunteered for something, they go like, whoa, before you get on that ship, why don't we talk about it, right? And so I think that in the Navy they say it stands for never again volunteer yourself, and I always like made it a point during that time to like, I always felt like I'll volunteer for everything. Like you said, at some point you're like, hey, I know where my 10-year plan is, I know where my goals are. I have no idea how I get from standing here on this island to the other side of the ocean here to get back to land where I ultimately want to be at, but if I wait for the perfect ship or perfect like log to float me over there, it may or may not come. I'm going to take whatever log comes by and see how it goes and start over again if I don't like it, or get on the ship and maybe it's not the right ship or it takes me to the wrong piece of land, but like I'll eventually get there. And so I think that some of those times that they did not take me where I wanted to go, but you found yourself standing somewhere like, this might be better than what I thought. And I think that oftentimes, if not like most of the time, those things when you like, maybe not the opportunity before wasn't the weird one that you volunteered for that nobody liked, but if you trace it back 1 to 10 to 20, you're like, this connection to give me to Mike Nelson was actually like agreeing to like take the trash out on Wednesday morning when nobody else wanted to. And so I've definitely had opportunities where I've had people call me and go, I heard you agreed to do this. And you're like, yeah. And they're like, that's a terrible idea, right? Nobody likes doing that. And you're like, yeah, I heard that. And they're like, well, then why are you doing it? And you're like, I'm not actually really sure. Like, and then, like I said, a few layers of Kevin Bacon connections to Kevin Bacon later, you're like you're in this like wonderful opportunity and getting exposed to stuff. And then, you find yourself in a situation where someone's like, it's unfair. You got this opportunity and you're like, little do you know what it took to get here, or what windy road got me here. And so, yeah, I don't know what the right answer is there, but you're right. I think that at some point it is that at the beginning of your career, is to take all those opportunities and sort them out. If you fall on your face a few times, it's still probably a great learning environment. And you might meet somebody who also fell on their face during that appointment that also like finds their way, and you now have a connection with. And then as you get moving towards your goal, I think, yeah, you have to narrow it down a little bit, focus on some other things, and refine the path you're on. And then, yeah, hopefully at some point you get to the point where you're like, it doesn't matter which way I go, right? You're comfortable where you're at, and you can go back to picking and choosing and not having somebody steer you around.
Yeah. And the other part I think I've used too is the organization or the people. Do I believe in the people and the direction they're going? Right. So for me, and I'm sure for you, it's probably very similar, right? If it's a newer organization and I'm not super vested, but so I'm a member of the Special Forces experience, and the people who run it, just awesome. I think they're doing it for 100% the right reasons. I think they've got some great stuff. So I helped them with their process, which was in, Idaho in the mountains for 8 days, literally the time that I was down in South Padre kiteboarding. So I was like, okay, but this, to me, I believe in the organization, the people that are doing it. Yeah, the little bit of money I got, I donated back to their documentary film. I'm like, you put it towards that. That's fine. But I did it because I believe in the organization and the direction. I think it's something that's definitely needed. So I was like, yeah, 8 days. I don't really get paid anything. I couldn't really work that much per se, but that was cool. That was an amazing opportunity. I'm glad I was able to do that. And then I was also glad that I was able to put myself in a position, paradoxically, by saying no to other things, to have the opportunity to have enough income to cover that time to be able to do it. So it's always this weird kind of seesaw back and forth all the time too.
Yeah, the people thing is huge. What you hit on. I sometimes joke with people that I'd go back to a war zone and just shovel dirt from one end to the other with the right group of people for
Yeah,
free.
totally.
And I would not. You couldn't pay me enough money to get on the biggest yacht in the world with like the finest food and the finest drinks with the people that I dislike. People that I don't
Yeah.
agree with, and I don't like the way their direction is or their attitudes. And so I think some people that sounds like insanity, but for me, there'd be no decision, there'd be no thought process. Over here, large yacht, lots of money, great food. These five people are intolerable. Five of the greatest people you'll ever have to spend time with, but all you do is like pick up the sandbags and carry them back and forth in the desert. And you're like, and it's for free, by the way. And I'd be like, where do I get my own sandbag? I'm on my
Yeah.
way. Like there's like there'd be no hesitation. The boat would be, people would be yelling and screaming, and I'd be already on the other way, and I would be deaf to that call. So yeah, I think that being able to like hitch your trailer to the right group of people or the right organization, whether it pays out for you financially or professionally is a different thing, but there's like no price or like cost for like your own mental well-being at some point too, and the things you get out of just like being in a sane situation.
Yeah. And even like I've turned down some projects that, monetarily looked like the dumbest decision I've probably ever made, but would have been such a living hell, And it's like, okay, am I at that point where I'm that desperate where I would do that? Right. And that's actually one of the things why I stayed working for a medical device company part time for so many years while I was doing fitness stuff, because I didn't want to put myself in the position of, okay, you have to huck whatever supplement known to man or this, or do things that, yeah, they're not illegal, but morally, I'd say they're pretty shady as fuck.
Yeah.
But I understand sometimes why people do that, even if I don't agree with it. If it's like that, or you're going to potentially lose your house, I might start doing that. I don't want to say that I wouldn't. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like enough
yeah.
pressure. Yeah, I might lean that way. And I don't want to find out if I would or not. So I'm going to stay working at this other job. So I can take a longer approach and still make my house payment and have medical insurance and eat food, but it was hard because you see other people doing well in certain things that you think, that might be a little questionable. But at what point do you want to throw everything in just for income, right? So like you said, a lot of times with volunteering, the benefit is you can hang out and meet great people. Might not make any money, but there might be some benefit down the line too. And it's always hard, I think, when you're younger, starting out, of seeing all the long-term benefits, right? I think you're just easier at seeing the short term. And I think as you get older, it's easier to see sort of the long-term kind of ramifications of everything, because you have that history. You can, trace back 20 years. Oh my God, I wouldn't be doing this talk if I didn't meet this person who met that person. I went to this conference and did this and this, like 8 things back. You're like, oh, wow.
100%.
I don't know if this makes any sense to people, but yeah. So when you start out, say yes to everything, at some point, it'll be a little bit more discriminating. But I think for most people, I think their end goal is to then have the more time and ability to, go back and do the things that they love. And if you can do them then independently of money, I think that also makes the decision process easier. It's just getting to that point where that becomes a valid option.
Definitely. Look at that, teaching people stuff. I like
it. All sorts of stuff. Yeah, as old people teaching all these youngsters shit. Cool. And then the last topic I just wanted to touch on real briefly was, I know you do a lot of imaging of injuries. And one of the questions I get from clients or just random people is, what are your thoughts about if they have an injury? Is there any good rules of thumb of when they would need imaging, when they wouldn't? Are there other tests that can be useful? Because the scenarios I think of in my head is that I've had a couple just random people email me that it sounds like they had a pretty solid diagnosis, but they were worried because the physician didn't do any imaging. And then you've got the other extreme where, you've seen the study, I think it's been replicated too, where they think the MRI or they imaged, people's backs, they sent it out to radiologists to read, and it was like 30 or 40% said you must have chronic pain. What they didn't tell either group is that, no, these were all like asymptomatic people. We just grabbed off the street and started scanning them. So just because you see crazy shit on an image, at least in terms of pain, doesn't always necessarily mean that you have pain or that that's the source of it either. So you've got these like two kind of weird polar extremes on each end.
Yeah, this is a great question. When you first started asking the question, I was nervous if I was going to have the answer to your question, because hoping for all scripted questions, but this is great. This is actually a great question, and some of the stuff that I've actually gave some talks on. I think that, as a quick array from what you're mentioning, there are tons of studies out there about how the imaging of like chronic changes in your body do not correlate to symptoms, right? And I think you hit on one of them. There are endless amount of times we used to have like a file of x-rays or MRIs where we would show students and say, hey, like, what do you think the function is of this person, right? And they'd go, oh, wheelchair, look how terrible arthritis is. Yeah, like can't possibly be moving, stuck in bed. And it turns out they're like a Division I athlete or a professional athlete or won a gold medal. And you're like, that can't possibly be right. And then you have another x-ray or an MRI that looks completely normal and someone physically can't move, right? They're incapacitated, they're crying, they're hysterical, and they just don't correlate. And those aren't one-offs. Those aren't like anecdotal. Those are obviously anecdotal experiences, but like there are plenty of evidence-based medicine literature that shows the lack of reliability. Spine imaging is usually the most common one, as every decade of life you go through, how more unreliable the chronic changes are, right? I mean, obviously, if you fall and break your wrist and the x-ray shows you have an acute fracture, it's not like an unreliable finding.
Right.
But the chronic changes of things like, that people typically reference of arthritis in your joints or your back, et cetera, is a huge kind of myth or like this, but it's also like a paradox, right? Because most people are visual people, right? And so,
right.
If you see it and you're like broken, fix, like, it's just like in your head, like it doesn't look pretty. I want it to look prettier, but and those studies probably to a certain degree are, depending on the study, some of those are underserved too, right? Because how do you know if somebody doesn't have one of those injuries and doing just fine? Because if they never come in or they never volunteer,
Right. You never see them.
they're like a not like they're asymptomatic or have no symptoms. Why? I mean, you wouldn't even know. So being like, oh, well, 100 people that came in to see me, only two have had this, or 50 have had it, and so see, it's only a flip of the coin. There's probably a lot more people out there that have it that don't even come in. You've already biased that study because somebody even has a complaint of their knee or their elbow, which puts them into a different pile. And so it is like, but at the same time, because we are visual people, and I think we're all like, or most of us are kind of on that area where we're skeptical, right? Like, how did they know that, right? Or like, how did they figure out to physically see what the problem is? I think as we get more imaging and stuff, I think more providers and physicians are more aware of those studies. But I think you'd be unhappily surprised of how many people don't know of all those studies, right? Or aren't aware that just because the picture looks bad doesn't mean that there's actually a problem. And I think, unfortunately, then people get wrong advice. And I think it leads to a little bit of what you're saying, right? Where someone eyeballs something and goes, that looks terrible. You have, severe findings. And then, they show up in my clinic and they're about as mild as it gets. And they're like, well, why are they telling me it looks terrible? And it's like, well, they don't really know. And I think that in medicine, I think to bring it circle from what we talked about, there are times like on deployment, somebody would be like, ask me some question. I'm like, I don't really know. And they're like, well, you are a doctor, aren't you? And I'm like, yeah, but I mean, like I do musculoskeletal stuff and you ask me like an OBGYN question. And I know enough
What's
to
this
like
mole on my back doing?
A board exam, and like that was 12 years ago or 20 years ago. And it's like, not, I don't know. And there's people who literally just do that. And so I think that, if somebody asked me something about maybe like, their thyroid lab work is usually the example I give. I mean, like I look at it and go, I don't know. I think it's supposed to be 6 and it looks like a 20. That's probably bad. I mean, I don't know, but like, I know that I don't know. And so I tell people like, I'm not really sure, it comes up as abnormal, but I don't really 100% know what that means because lab reference values are different and patient population. You really need to ask somebody that knows. I'm not sure everybody always does that, right? When you ask people their advice, they sometimes just give you their advice and they don't quantify, or specify that maybe that's not 100% like their reign of the area, or as you have mentioned too, you just look it up on the free information that you have on the internet.
And just Dr. Google everything now.
Dr. Google sometimes
that couldn't tell you anything bad
going on either. And so, and people will tell you sometimes whatever you want to hear though, too. Right. And sometimes not, or most of the time, I think it's not in a malicious way. I think people want to help you and want you to like be happy and like, review them well. And so they'll tell you whatever you want to hear, whether it's 100% correct or not, because they think that that's what you want. And I think that that's challenging. And so you're right. I think the imaging thing is challenging because it's not always very reliable. When we talk in my clinic, I give people options. And I think that's also a fascinating thing because depending on the personality, not everybody wants to like have input in what happens to them, which I find fascinating times too, right? I mean, like I would like to know all the risks and benefits, right? And then like let me have some input. Don't tell me what I want to do, and because it depends on your functional goals or what you want to do going forward. Might depend on whether you want a surgery, injection therapy, or just let it be, right? And so I think as we go through things in clinic, I typically tell people here are the next steps, right? We could get the following imaging, but it may or may not affect our treatment plan, right? If it has this or that, it's still like whether it's the first 3 things in your differential, the treatment is still the following. And the test is expensive and like nobody likes being in that tube, or there's a lot of radiation involved in that. And there's some procedures or some of those images, there's risk involved with the radiation or the contrast and stuff. And so I think all those things have to go into it and people have to decide. And I get a variety of answers, right? I mean, if you have a stress injury and I go, hey, we could get the MRI, the treatment with or without the MRI is the following. But and I tell them, some people like to see the images. And sometimes you can use those images to not only convince the patient, but also to get them to buy in, right? And so like if I come up to you and go, hey, I really think you have a bad stress fracture in your shin, and I don't think that's a great plan to continue to like play basketball or run track, et cetera. And you go, yeah, okay, buddy. Like I've been in worse pain. I think that sometimes when you show people stuff and they go, oh my gosh, that looks terrible. And I think there are numerous times in medicine where people are kind of not sure, even if it's not that they don't believe you, right? But, sometimes seeing things, again, people are visual, and I think that showing people things is helpful. And so sometimes, you pull something up. I always go over images with people. And so you pull up their MRI and they go, that looks terrible. And you're like, you haven't even said anything yet. They don't, most of the people don't even 100% know what they're looking at, but they know that like, that's not what it's supposed to look like, right? You don't need to be a doctor oftentimes to see things that don't look right. And, but the flip side of that is sometimes people go, that looks terrible. And you go, yeah, but it doesn't matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like here's three other people that look worse and they're more active than you. They're maybe not better athlete, but you know what I mean? Like you're running a 5K, this guy's running marathons and like just won the local marathon and his hip looks a billion times worse. And we only got an x-ray because he fell on his hip. And the arthritis is just incidental. We thought maybe he had a fracture like on the lateral part of his femur. And so like those things that come up are really challenging and it's hard to sort through those things. And I think the visual thing can get in people's heads too. And so that's part of the conversation. Like if we get an image, it's going to show the following things because everybody over this age there's a greater likelihood you're going to have this finding than not, but it's not relevant and that's not what your pain source is, right? And so then some people see that image and they go like, oh my gosh, and they can't get over it, right? They can't get over the fact that there's this thing. And you're like, yeah, but you've always had that. That's been there. That took 12 years to grow.
Yeah.
It's not related to what's happening
they
here.
keep thinking about.
Yeah. And you just feel like something's wrong and it hurts it causes anxiety, stress, and impairs your performance. And I think all those things can be detrimental to your health too. And so there's a big plus minus there. And I think having those conversations with somebody of what they feel most comfortable with and how it'll help them the most. Because I have had people, and I fall in this category. I don't want to know, if it's not going to change anything I do, I don't want that stuck in my head because I'm going to have that picture there. And so for me, unless I need it or it's going to like help somebody else, like get it out of I just don't want to see it because I think that it may affect the way that I perceive what's going on. Like maybe it does hurt more than I think it does, right? Even though it's not relevant. I think one of the things that advents that I think has been huge for my clinical practice and for my patients is the advent of diagnostic musculoskeletal ultrasound. And I think the benefit of that is I think there's a lot of times I see folks in clinic and we go over things and I think not to be too tangential here, but like, I think what also is sometimes the skeptical thing about medicine is I think that not everybody, I'm not saying everybody does this, but I think a lot of us, if I go in the room and I spend 15 minutes with you, Mike, I've spent 4 minutes. Every minute I spend in the room with you, I usually tell people I spent 4 to 6 minutes outside the room, either before or after we're together, being a part of like your clinical case, right? Reviewing your chart, looking at your images, thinking of all the differential diagnoses, looking into the things that you need done. And then we come into the room so I can get more information from you, do the physical exam that's key to us moving forward, and then talking about how that refines all the information I learned about you before you got there, right? And then all the time I spend afterwards ensuring that we're going down the right place, coordinating care with other providers or people in the treatment team we talked about before. And so I think sometimes when you see that snapshot and Mike comes in the room to see me for 10 minutes and I go, how did Mike figure anything out in 10 minutes, right? But the reality is Mike probably spent 35 minutes figuring that out. And he spent 45 minutes on my case with 4 billion other people before me, right? And you start patterns of knowledge. And so I think sometimes that makes people skeptical too, a little bit, right? Because they don't get to see the whole hour that you spent on their case, right? And so, but I think that to get back to what I was saying, I think that, when you're seeing somebody and you're doing this exam and history and reviewing the mechanism of injury, if you were there on the sidelines and you go, hey, I know that Mike has a UCL sprain of his elbow. And people go, I don't know how you know that, right? You can take a machine, a musculoskeletal ultrasound machine, and it's right next to the bedside. And within a few minutes, show them exactly what you're talking about. And I think it's huge. And oftentimes it's not changing my diagnosis. It's not changing the clinical care or treatment that's going to happen afterwards, but it does put that visual component to it for like a fraction of the price of any price, right? And then also without having to like wait 2 weeks to get into the MRI or worry about your insurance denying it, not being, maybe not liking being inside the tight tube of an MRI and the cost, et cetera. And so to be able to like at point of care, show somebody an injury, I think is awesome. And then it also adds that dynamic component to it too, right? That UCL injury that may look kind of okay when it's like nice and flat and you're laying on the table. I can then take your elbow and stress, give a little bit of a valgus stress to it and see that joint open and you get to watch it too, right? And I think it's fascinating how many times like I was mentioning before with the MRIs, where I put the ultrasound probe down and we're looking at things and someone goes, oh, that's not good. And it's somebody that's 15 years old or 80 years old, 80-year-old farmer he's been to doctors twice when he cut off his finger and today, and he's already diagnosed himself with that's not good. And he knows that there's
Hmm.
a problem there. And, or this 15-year-old kid who has no interest in medicine and could care less and has no anatomy experience and goes, well, that doesn't look right. Right. And I think that from some of those things too, when we're talking about sports injuries or musculoskeletal injuries, I mean, you can take a look at the other side, right? I had a wrestler during a tournament not too long ago that was like, how do you know my ankle's broken? And I'm like, it's just broken, man. Like I evaluated you, I watched it happen, like it doesn't look good, right? And he went on to show me how it was fine. And to be fair, it happened like 5 or 6 mats away from me, and I didn't. I saw it kind of happen. I go, oh, it doesn't look great. And I heard the kind of crowd respond, and the trainer went out there. And then he's a tough kid, and he's going to be a great wrestler at the Division I level too. And so, like, he goes out there and gets mad and pins the kid in like 2 more seconds, and then runs away, physically ran away. And I was like, and the trainer's like, I think you really need to look at that ankle. Like, I think it's broken. And I'm like, man, it'd be hard to sell me on that right now. He did a sprint 30 yards down the mats. And so, you go kind of chasing after him, and we go into the training room and you evaluate him. You're like, yeah, this thing's pretty broken. He's like, no, it's not. Watch. And he proceeds to jump on it and show you how strong he is. And you're like, you really need to sit down. Like, your fibula is broken. And he's like, I don't believe you. Essentially, like, I wouldn't have been able to do all that. Didn't you see me pin that kid? And you're like, yeah, I guess, and you do an evaluation. He isn't very uncomfortable, right? He's like a
Hmm.
1 out of 10. He's very unimpressed of what's going on. And he seems like he's fine. And so I am fortunate enough to have a small ultrasound for like a portable one. It's like the size of your phone, and it just
Is it a
Bluetooth.
butterfly?
Yeah, it's a different brand, but it's a
Different
G
brand.
brand of that, a V scan, but it's like the
Okay.
same concept, and it Bluetooths to my phone. I just like put the little like leg up and put my phone down, and you can take a look. And I show him his broken leg, and he's like, "Oh, how do I know that all ankles don't look like that?" Great. Take off your other shoe and we'll show
Yeah,
you,
yeah. Let's look
and
at the other
the other
side.
ankle looks different. And then like, he's still kind of skeptical. And like, you can look at my ankle too, I guess. And then we put it back down after looking at 3 ankles, and his original ankle looks not great. And then he's like, man, that thing's really broken. Right. And, I think that I don't know if you're selling that kid that he has a problem without that. I think that he tells me that he does not. Like, thanks for your advice, buddy. I don't know who you are, but like, pass, and I'm going to go
Hmm.
back out there and wrestle, right? And so I think being able to show people their injuries, even though it wouldn't have changed my management, and I think to build on what we said earlier to full circle is that, if you thought that kid had a broken ankle and I gave you a description of a kid who pinned a kid, sprinted off 30 yards, did a bunch of jumps, has full strength and has no pain when I'm messing around with his ankle, and I'm telling you as like his dad or mom or trainer or coach at a remote place that I think he has a broken ankle and I'm not going to let him wrestle the rest of the day, I'm going to guess that all 5 of you are going to tell me to shove it too, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it like doesn't make any sense. I've seen a lot of people with broken ankles. If you're a layman's or even a physician, and you just go like, that doesn't make any sense, you're an idiot. And so we're going to do whatever we want to do. And if you send that kid away, right, and I send him to get a cast put on, or I send him home and he gets back to, Maine or California, right? And they go, you don't have a broken ankle. I'm not sure how much more business I'm getting, right? And
Yeah.
I also just lose credibility of other people, and more importantly, like, you kind of ruin somebody's opportunity, right? And so I think that when we were talking before about like being overseas and stuff, to be have something like an ultrasound machine to be able to confirm your clinical decision making, so that when you have to make big decisions like that affect people's lives, that you can be more confident in what the answer is, I think is really important too. And so I think those opportunities of to be able to do that, to confirm that at the bedside, I think unfortunately, we're not at the point yet where there's a lot of people that can do that. I think that it's been a great career opportunity for me to be able to be invited to like national or regional conferences or local teaching opportunities, et cetera, to show other folks how to do that, or the training that I was fortunate to be a part of at the Naval Academy for fellows and residents and students, et cetera, so they can start to learn some of those skills, because It's not commonplace yet. People talk about the ultrasound being the next stethoscope, where, regardless of your specialty, the applications of it are great. I had a patient the other day that said they did an ultrasound on his eyeball, and I'm like, I don't know what that means, but the fact that all those things can be done at bedside easier, like less risk, and done at the point of care, so you can get the answer sooner, I think are huge. There are numerous times where at the end where someone goes, I'm here to get an MRI, and we do an ultrasound instead, and I show them the answer, which I don't think they need the ultrasound or the MRI, but they want, some people, like we talked about, are visual. You show them the ultrasound images, and I go, I'm still happy to order the MRI, and they go, what do I need an MRI for? And
Yeah.
so I think that those are great, and that saved not just like the patient, all the cost and expense, but the healthcare organization as well. And so I think all those things are pluses. But the other aspect of your question about, when as you as a patient go, when do I need an image? I'm not sure what the answer to that 100% is. I think that normally the answer is if you have discomfort that just is unrelenting and not getting better, like in a normal, like the normal, like course or history of the disease, right? Like if you sprain your ankle and like you can't walk on it, and it's still, and after a couple, like a day or two, right? And you're like, I can't even bear weight on my leg. And so if you have a functional deficit, and it's not improving with time, or the normal price of protection, rest, ice, compression, elevation type of stuff, and it's just like not getting better, I think that's the time when you need to like ask somebody else for help, right? I don't know if that means you need an image, but I think that's when you need to seek out for help. You sprain your ankle and you can walk on and you're doing okay and you're getting better every day. I don't know that's something you need emergently seen or need an image. But I think if something's not getting better and it doesn't seem to fit in the time frame of that specific injury you think it is, I think you need to reach out to an expert and get their opinion on it, which may not involve an image, but I think that's when you need to ask for some help. And I think that, to build on that too, and this might be a self-serving plug, but I mean, I think that maybe asking people like, hey, I think there's something wrong with my knee, and they go, I need an MRI. Maybe asking like, hey, instead of getting that MRI, do you have a colleague that can perform musculoskeletal ultrasound to evaluate that without me spending all this money on an MRI or waiting 3 weeks to get the MRI and getting that answer sooner? Or maybe, as a patient, seeking out those opportunities online, right? Like I have a musculoskeletal injury, who in my community does diagnostic ultrasound that can evaluate me at point of care might be beneficial as well for you.
Yeah.
That's a long answer. Is that what you're looking for?
No, that's perfect. No, I know it's not an easy answer, but I like the context, because you've got the two extremes, and I've had people I've talked to who are like, that doctor was an idiot. He didn't look at any imaging. I'm like, well, if you've got a massive functional discrepancy, you probably don't need an image to determine that, right? I'm not a physician, but I'm guessing you can tell that that's screwed. Yep,
Yeah,
he's got an issue. Versus
yeah.
the people who get an image and they're like, I didn't have that much pain, but I got this image and look at this thing. This is horrible. And they're
Yeah.
just like losing their mind. I'm like, but you didn't have hardly any pain before you went in, right? Now your pain's like, a 7 out of a 10. Before it was like a 1 out of a 10. What changed? Oh, but I know it's screwed. It's bad. And you're just like, oh no.
Yeah, the amount of people I talked down off the ledge, it happened to me just yesterday. A young girl is going to be playing Division I basketball. She's on her way out to school in a couple of weeks, and she got some information. They're like, the person that told me about this says it looks terrible. And then when I told the coaches and athletic trainers, they were like, meh. And they
Yeah.
seemed disinterested. And the family was mad because, the providers that they saw made it sound terrible. Right. And then, we went over and I'm like, this looks awesome. Like, this is pretty great. And they're like, oh, wait, what? And so like those things, and you could feel the pressure deflate out of the room. Right. And you have to explain a little bit more. I mean, obviously you don't walk in and just go, this is fine, and walk out. I mean, it was a longer
Right.
discussion, but as you discuss and talk through it and why it's okay, and it is normal to see things like that, or maybe not normal, but like it's not uncommon to see that. And it doesn't mean that you have a big problem or something that's going to prevent you from playing basketball. I think that like you can just watch the room kind of decompress a little bit. And again, not just like from a musculoskeletal standpoint, but that like like we were talking about, again, full circle, when you're on deployment or you're trying to play sports, if you're distracted mentally, you're just like not the same, right? Professionally or like athletically. And so to be able to like have some reassurance that like it's not something that you have to worry about, this rubber band that you keep stretching that's eventually going to snap and hit you in the fingers, is very important to know as well. And so I think that stuff goes well. The problem is though, Mike, is that you can't always like walk in a room and judge who does want to see that image and who does not,
Mm-hmm.
and who's going to freak out if they see something that's not important because they're a visual person, or the person who doesn't want to see it. And there's not a personality, in my experience, there's not a personality type that I've been able to gauge, or a certain like, occupation or whatever the case, right? Age or gender. I mean, everybody's different. And some people where you're like, well, I don't even guess, and I just like, I give them the options and let them pick, right? And so, because if I was to guess, like in my head, I'm like, oh, Mike won't want to see this image. Mike's going to be like, well, you're not going to give me an x-ray. And you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you can if you want it, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like, I just upfront tell people like, here's the plus minus of these things. You want to grab one or not? And then occasionally people ask you what you want to do. And then you got to be careful because something I would do, I tell people, just because it's something I would do, I'm not sure you should always be following me around. So
Yeah.
I'm probably more likely to be dragging my broken leg, my dead leg around the room looking like the hunchback in Notre Dame than be like seeking out help. You know what I mean? So I'm not always, what would the doctor do is probably not always the right answer either. And so I think it's challenging to sort through those people, and you're going to have some upset people, right? I mean, you're going to end up with somebody that comes back to you, Mike, and goes, Adam doesn't make any sense. Like, he didn't get me 6 MRIs and 4
Right.
X-rays, right? But I think on my end, if you came back and told me that, I'd probably tell you that I did offer him the X-ray and MRI. You know what I mean? And so I think
Mm-hmm.
that's also why, in order to make sure people are not only getting the right diagnoses, but they feel comfortable with the answer you're giving them. That's why I think that, that patient-centered healthcare stuff is most important, because I think you're not going to be happy unless you do it kind of your own way a little bit, right? There's things around that, right? I'm not saying if you come in and you tell me you want 400 Percocets, right, and you want a full body MRI and you want it for free, that's like somehow going to happen, or we're going to do that just so you feel like happy, or you leave a good review, right? I mean, you certainly have to tell people no. I mean, I've had one of those recently where someone asked for a specific amount of Percocets and fentanyl patches,
Oh,
and
geez.
yeah, and I was like, well, I'm not doing that, and
Yeah.
got a bad review online that I didn't help them out, and so but what are you gonna? I mean, like, you can't. So you can't always. I'm not saying that you have to, like, it's not patient demand healthcare
Yeah.
where you
Yeah.
have to give people things that are harmful to them. That amount of fentanyl and Percocet is obviously going to hurt someone, either that patient or
Yeah.
somebody else, when they sell that to that person or give that to somebody else. And so you do have to make some tough decisions, like I was saying, in the military, on deployment as well. But you do, if you give people, I think, the opportunity to have some input in their healthcare, I think it gives them that skin in the game you were talking about earlier when you're talking about what you do for work as well. I mean, if you just make decisions for them and it doesn't turn out, and they go, well, you made me do it, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
the literature says that's like what we do, like that's the standard of care. But you're right, there's not always, like, medicine is not black or white. It's not as much of a science as it is there's an art to medicine. And so having the patient have some input into what the artwork's going to look like, I think, has a little bit better buy-in. When it doesn't go well and someone comes back, and I don't necessarily tell people I told you so, but there are times where I go, all right, can we do it what I recommended this
Yeah.
time? Or you say, like, hey, no problem, like, we at least ruled that out, right? What you were
Yeah.
concerned about, there was no harm in trying, like, what you wanted to do. And like I said, like, either diagnosis, either treatment head to head is equal in the literature, and neither are, like, potentially have any different risk profile. Pick one, you know what I mean? And like, well, I want to do chiropractor, I want to do physical therapy, or I want to try this medicine. And so, yeah, those two medicines are the same. Those two types of therapies are not the same, but head to head, but I
Mm-hmm.
can't tell you 100% which one's better. And so, yeah, you pick which one works best for you. And when you come back, you go, that didn't help. And you go, all right, we'll cross that out. Next one down the line. And I think that sometimes, or most of the time, that allows for, like, better buy-in. It makes the patient and the provider, physician, happier too, because you're doing it together and you're weeding through the process together. And so if something fails, you fail together. And I think that creates a little bit more camaraderie together too, right? If you and I are, like, going through the fight together, and we go, do we want to go left or right at the fork in the road? If we both agree to go left and it's the wrong answer, we learn together and we go, damn it, we should have made some better decisions there. Let's go back and go right. But if we get to that fork and I go, Mike, we're going left, and you go, that's a terrible plan, and I, like, physically drag you to the left, and we have a bad outcome, not only did we have a bad outcome, but, like, our rapport with each other is going to get shitty, right? Because you're going to tell me, I told you so, man. And even if we go back and go right, and then we still, like, win, and nothing terrible happened because we went left, other than, like, failure, disappointment, or having to run 2 lengths of the race instead of 1, right? Which isn't maybe the worst, but it is more effort. We're still not going to like each other a little bit, right? There's still going to be a little bit of that. This guy makes me do everything he says all the time. Didn't get it right. I had to run an extra leg of the race because of this guy. And there's going to be a little rub there, either for a little while or for always. And so I think getting that input from people to decide within the realms of oftentimes we're constrained by someone's health insurance or factors like that, right? Not everything's realistic, like the Percocets. And so I think that within the factors or within the realm or the rules of the engagement of the engagement of healthcare, I think if we make group decisions as a team, I think the outcomes come a little bit better. And then I think some of those preferences of how you learn or how you will feel comfortable with your healthcare come out. I do want the image. I do not. I'll take on the risk of this, and they understand what goes on. I think the outcomes turn out a little bit better.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your time today. We really appreciate it. And if you want to be found, how would people find you? Or maybe you prefer to be hidden in Northeast Iowa.
That's right. You try to hide in the mountains of Eastern Iowa. I don't have as much of I work at Medical Associates in Dubuque, Iowa. And so on the website under physical medicine and rehabilitation or under sports medicine, you can find my bio and the services that I have to offer. I don't have as much of a social media preference, but
not a bad thing.
Yeah. But, I give a number of talks, like you had mentioned, at national conferences and regional things. And I've been involved with a number of academic things and publications. And so just like PubMed or Googling my name will come up with some of those opportunities, SUSMARSKI, Adam, and or looking it up at my current, my transition to the civilian world in Dubuque, the mountains of Dubuque, Iowa, at Medical Associates Sports and Spine is probably the best way. And I appreciate it, Mike. This was a great opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Great. Have a good day, Mike.
Thank you so much to Dr. Adam for being on the podcast today and sharing all of his wisdom. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you got some cool takeaways out of our wide-ranging conversation there today. And as I mentioned at the intro of the show, this is brought to you by the Flux Diet Mentorship. If that is something you're interested in, it is primarily geared towards people who are, I'd say, new to intermediate in the online training environment. What I found was there's some pretty decent programs for people who have been doing it for a while. I didn't really find much for people who were new, other than, I would say, extremely advanced and overpriced things that were not very useful. So the core of it is actually teaching you how to write content. So it is very much a content-based thing. If you get good at writing content, you can then apply that to Facebook, Instagram. You could apply it to videos, articles, wherever. And that was a thing that when I was learning was probably the thing I missed the most. I was good at technical writing. I was okay at other writing, but writing specific content for, say, a newsletter or how to set up a promotion if you're doing one-on-one training or you have a product, that was something that took me forever to figure out. So that's the primary basis of it. We do also cover exercise assessments, marketing, which is content-based, mindset, both you and your clients, and then also some personal development. It is a 6-month program, so it is a pretty hefty commitment. So if you are interested in that, find a way to email me. Yes, that is your first shit test, is to find a way to email me, and that is done on purpose. So thank you so much again for listening to the podcast. As always, really appreciate it. Big thanks to Dr. Adam for sharing all of his information. And if you're interested in the Flux Diet Mentorship, drop me a note, and we will talk to all of you next week.
Is that a toupee you're wearing, or did your cat die?